Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. Darian Collins stood in his custom-built walk-in closet, methodically buttoning his dress shirt. Through the open doorway, he could see his reflection multiplied in the master bathroom's trio of mirrors, each one showing a man who appeared successful on paper yet felt like a stranger in his own home. The morning light filtering through the bathroom's frosted windows caught the silver threading through his dark hair, evidence of 23 years of marriage that had aged in more ways than time alone. The sounds of laughter echoed from down the hallway where his wife, Cecilia, and their daughter, Ava, were sharing another private joke he would never be privy to. Their voices grew louder as they approached the master bedroom, their heels clicking against the marble flooring he had paid for during last year's renovation. "Mom, you have to wear the red one." Ava's voice carried through the space. "The black dress is nice, but the red is absolutely killer. You don't think it's too much for a family reunion?" Cecilia asked, though Darian could hear the false modesty in her tone. She already knew which dress she would wear. She had spent 3 hours at Nordstrom, selecting it specifically for today. "Too much. Please." Ava's scoff was audible even from the closet. "Half the fun is making everyone else feel underdressed." Besides, her voice took on a sly tone that made Darian's hands pause on his tie. Certain people appreciated a woman who knew how to make an entrance. The meaningful emphasis on certain people made Darian's jaw clench. He knew exactly whom Ava meant. Grayson Pierce would be at the reunion today. His presence had dominated their conversations for the past week. Ever since the guest list had been circulated in the family group chat, Ava and Cecilia's teasing tones held a pretense of scolding that fooled no one. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not? It's not like Dad's listening. He's probably making spreadsheets about the cost-benefit ratio of wearing designer versus department store." Their shared laughter felt like ice water down Darian's spine. He finished knotting his tie with practiced precision, remembering when he had first learned the wins or losses. It had been on his wedding day, standing in a much smaller bathroom, full of hope and dreams about the family he would build. The memory now felt like a mockery. Darian stepped out of the closet into the master bedroom, taking in the scene before him. Clothes were strewn across the king-sized bed, designer pieces that had cost more than his first car. Cecilia stood before the full-length mirror, already wearing the red dress that seemed designed to draw attention. The neckline plunged daringly low, the fabric clinging to curves that belied her 45 years. Their daughter perched on the tufted ottoman beside her, both of them ignoring the chaos they created in their pursuit of the perfect outfit. "The bathroom counter is covered in makeup," Darian said, keeping his voice neutral despite the frustration building in his chest. "We need to leave in 30 minutes to arrive on time." Cecilia barely glanced his way, too busy adjusting her dress. "Relax, Darian. Nobody shows up exactly when these things start. We have plenty of time." "Yeah, Dad," Ava added with an eye roll as she tapped away on her phone. "It's not like it's one of your precious board meetings where everyone has to march in at exactly 9 a.m. sharp. God, you're so uptight about everything." The invitation said 2 o'clock, Darian pointed out, moving to straighten the pile of discarded clothes. "It's already 1:30 and the drive to the country club takes." "Leave those," Cecilia interrupted, finally turning to face him. "Rosa can deal with them tomorrow. That's what we pay her for, isn't it? Rosa shouldn't have to clean up unnecessary messes just because." "Oh my gosh, Ava. Grow up already." Here we go again with the lectures about responsibility and consideration. Newsflash, Dad, normal people don't spend their time worrying about the feelings of the cleaning lady. Rosa is a person who deserves respect, just like everyone else who works to make our lives comfortable. "Speaking of making our lives comfortable," Ava said in a tone that shifted to the sweet voice she used when she wanted something, "Did you transfer the money for my spring break trip?" Darian paused, holding the designer dress still in his hands. "I thought we discussed this yesterday. $2,000 for a weekend in Miami seems excessive." especially considering your credit card bills from last month. Mom already said it was fine. Ava's sweet tone vanished, replaced by the entitled edge he had grown too familiar with. Of course it's fine, Cecilia interjected before Darian could respond, spraying another cloud of expensive perfume around herself. God forbid our daughter actually enjoys her college years instead of penny-pinching like some people. There's a difference between being frugal and responsible spending, Darian said, feeling the familiar tension headache beginning to build. I work hard to provide for this family. Well, here we go again. Ava threw her hands up in exasperation. The great martyr Darian Collins, sacrificing everything for his ungrateful family. Should we bow down now or wait until after your speech about fiscal responsibility? Cecilia laughed, a sound as sharp and dismissive as she applied another coat of lipstick. Honey, just transfer the money. It's not like we can't afford it. Then she turned, fixing him with a calculating look. Is there something you're not telling us about our finances? The insinuation stung. After 23 years of carefully managing their wealth, growing his business from a startup to a successful corporation, ensuring they'd never have to worry about money, he had his competence questioned again. Our finances are fine, he said stiffly. That's not the point. It's about teaching values and principles. Ava scoffed, standing to adjust her own designer outfit in the mirror. Your values are as outdated as that suit. No offense, Dad, but maybe if you spent less time worrying about saving for retirement and more time actually living, you wouldn't be so boring. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Darian pulled out his phone and made the transfer while trying to ignore the triumphant look Ava and Cecilia exchanged in the mirror. $2,000 was a drop in the ocean of their wealth, but another crack in the foundation of respect he had tried to build. Thanks, Daddy, Ava said sweetly as her phone pinged with the transfer notification. See, was that so hard? Darian watched as his daughter bounced across the room to join her mother at the mirror, both of them checking their appearance one final time. The scene before him captured everything wrong with his family dynamic. The superficial bond between mother and daughter, their casual dismissal of his concerns, the way they treated him like an ATM rather than a husband and father. We should get going, he said quietly, picking up his suit jacket. Traffic might be heavy. 5 more minutes, Cecilia replied absently, leaning closer to the mirror to check her makeup. Perfection takes time, darling. Not that you'd understand that. Ava snickered at the jab, and Darian felt something shift inside him. He watched as they crimped and preened, preparing themselves to impress a man who wasn't their husband or father, and wondered when exactly he had lost control of his family. When had his wife's beauty become a weapon instead of a gift? When had his daughter learned to manipulate instead of love? As he stood there in his precisely pressed suit in the middle of the bedroom he had paid for, but never felt comfortable in, Darian Collins realized he was standing on the edge of something momentous. He just didn't yet know if it was a breakthrough or a breakdown. The car will be out front, he said, turning to leave the room. Neither of them acknowledged his departure. They were too busy discussing whether Cecilia should wear her diamond tennis bracelet or the sapphire one, both anniversary gifts from him that had been received with dismissive thanks. Darian descended the curved staircase, each step carrying him further from the laughter upstairs, but closer to a decision point he could feel approaching. Today's reunion would change everything. He could feel it in his bones. He just didn't yet know how much his family would come to regret their choices. The drive to the country club stretched Darian's nerves to their breaking point. From the back seat, Ava orchestrated what felt like a carefully planned assault on his patience, her voice full of calculated excitement as she read updates from the family group chat. Uncle Julian just arrived, she announced, her fingers flying across her phone screen. And you know who usually rides with him, right? Cecilia shifted in the passenger seat, checking her lipstick in the visor mirror for the umpteenth time. Oh, I hadn't thought about that, she said with a practiced nonchalance. They discussed nothing else for days, how Grayson Pierce always came to family events with Julian, how he had recently divorced his second wife, and how successful his investment firm had become. They noted that the parking lots were getting full, and Darian observed as they turned into the country club entrance. "If we'd left when I suggested." "Oh my gosh, Dad, seriously." Ava leaned forward between the seats. "Nobody cares about parking spots except you. Besides, Mom needs to make an entrance, right, Mom?" Cecilia smiled with a practiced expression that never quite reached her eyes. "A lady should never be the first to arrive at a party. It seems too eager. But being fashionably late to see old friends is totally different," Ava added with a knowing smirk. "Especially friends you haven't seen in forever." Darian guided their Mercedes into one of the few remaining spots, deliberately taking his time with the parking job. Each second he delayed was another moment before the inevitable, before he'd have to watch his wife's eyes light up for another man. "There's Uncle Julian's car." Ava practically bounced out of her seat the moment he turned off the engine. "Mom, look who's standing with him." Through the windshield, Darian could see Julian and his wife, Samantha, chatting with a tall figure in an expensive suit. Even from this distance, Grayson Pierce's confidence was visible in his stance and in the way others seemed to naturally orbit around him. "Well," Cecilia smoothed her dress as she stepped out of the car, "we shouldn't keep the family waiting." The walk to the country club entrance felt like a march to execution. Darian watched as his wife's entire demeanor transformed. Her steps became lighter, her smile more genuine, and her hand rose to casually brush through her styled hair. Beside her, Ava practically vibrated with anticipation, her role as matchmaker already in full swing. "Cecilia Collins, you're a vision." Grayson's voice carried across the parking lot, rich with charm that made Darian's teeth clench. The man stepped away from his group, arms opening in welcome, as though he had every right to embrace another man's wife. Grayson moved forward. Darian thought bitterly as Cecilia accepted his embrace with enthusiasm that made Darian's blood pressure spike. "You look amazing. The tech hub must agree with you." Grayson held her at arm's length, his appreciative gaze lingering far too long. "Not half as well as time agrees with you. You haven't aged a day since college." His eyes flickered to Ava. "And this can't be little Ava. Last time I saw you, you were barely up to your mother's waist." "Hi, Mr. Pierce," Ava replied, turning on the charm she usually reserved for getting her way. "Mom's told me so many stories about you, all good ones, I hope." Grayson laughed, still holding Cecilia's gaze. "Oh, definitely," Ava assured him with a meaningful smile, especially when it came to the stories about college. "Mom says you were quite the dancer back then." The implications in her tone made Darian step forward, placing himself slightly between Grayson and his wife. "Grayson." "Darian." Grayson's acknowledgement was barely a nod before he turned back to Cecilia. "We'll have to see if your mother still remembers any of our old moves later." Before Darian could object, Uncle Julian and Samantha joined their group, creating a buffer of socially acceptable conversation. But Darian noticed how Grayson maintained his position close to Cecilia, how his wife seemed to unconsciously lean toward her old flame, and how Ava worked to keep the conversation flowing in their direction. Inside, the country club's grand entrance hall was decorated with flowers and banners welcoming the extended family. Clusters of relatives stood chatting, their voices creating a steady hum that did nothing to drown out the sound of Cecilia's laughter at Grayson's jokes. Darian's cousin, Miles, approached, extending his hand. "How's business? Still crushing it in the tech sector?" "It's been a good year, hasn't it?" Darian replied automatically, his attention split between the conversation and the way Grayson's hand kept finding reasons to touch Cecilia's arm. "I heard you closed that deal with the Tokyo Group," Miles continued, oblivious to Darian's distraction. "What was it?" 50 million. 67. Darian corrected him, watching as Ava skillfully maneuvered the conversation across the room, ensuring her mother and Grayson remained at the center of their social circle. "Damn impressive," Miles whistled. "You always were the smart one," Remember when Grayson tried to compete with you back in college? His startup tanked while yours took off. Though between us, he's done pretty well for himself since then. He just bought a place in the seaside enclave. The irony wasn't lost on Darian. The beach house Cecilia had wanted was deemed too risky an investment, while Grayson had one just like it. He could already imagine the conversation this would spark on the drive home. The pointed comments about his lack of spontaneity, his failure to understand what his wife needed. As the afternoon wore on, Darian watched the careful dance unfold. Cecilia and Grayson never spent too long together, never did anything that could be definitively labeled inappropriate. But their orbit around each other was constant. Their glances were charged with meaning, and their brief touches lingered just a moment too long. Eva conducted the room like a maestro, orchestrating conversations that highlighted her mother's wit and beauty, while subtly undermining her father. Mom was just telling us about the charity gala she's organizing, someone remarked. She said to one group, then turned to another with, "Can you believe Dad didn't want me to take on such a big project? He thought it would be too stressful for me." Each comment was a paper cut, small enough to be dismissed individually, but collectively they painted a clear picture. Darian was the villain in their story. The controlling husband who held back his vibrant wife. The boring father who didn't understand his daughter's needs. "They're about to serve dinner," Samantha announced, appearing at Darian's elbow. "It's table 3. You, Cecilia, Ava, Julian, and me." She hesitated, glancing at Grayson. Of course they were. Darian looked at his assigned seat, strategically placed to ensure he had a perfect view of his wife and her former flame throughout the meal. He wondered if Ava had had a hand in the seating arrangements. It wouldn't surprise him. As they moved toward their table, Darian caught sight of his reflection in one of the hall mirrors. He saw what everyone else saw. A successful businessman in an expensive suit, the very picture of stability and security. But he also saw what his wife and daughter must see, a predictable man, safe and boring, useful for his wallet, but lacking passion. The question was, what would they see when he finally stopped being predictable? The dining room of the country club glowed with warm light from crystal chandeliers, their sparkle matched only by the gleam of fine china and silver place settings. At table 3, Darian sat rigid in his chair, each minute feeling like an hour as he watched his wife captivate their dinner companions with practiced charm. "Remember that spring break trip to Cancun? The way you danced on that beach, Cecilia. I'd never seen anything like it," Grayson asked, his voice carrying easily across the table. Cecilia laughed, a sound warm and genuine, in a way Darian hadn't heard directed at him in years. "God, we were so young and crazy back then. Remember that little beachside bar where they taught us to salsa? Young and crazy." Ava interjected, her tone deliberately provocative. "Mom, you're still the best dancer I know. Dad's the only one who never wants to see you dance anymore." The comment drew knowing looks from around the table. Darian cut into his perfectly cooked steak, focusing on the motion of his knife and fork rather than the way Grayson's eyes lingered on his wife. "Your father prefers more structured activities," Cecilia added, sipping her wine. "Spreadsheets, investment portfolios, retirement planning. That's his idea of excitement." Uncle Julian chuckled uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, Darian's business sense has served him well. That new tech acquisition must have been quite profitable." "Oh yes," Cecilia replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Darian's very good with money. It's just a shame he forgets there's more to life than profit margins. Like spontaneity," Grayson offered, raising his wine glass in Cecilia's direction. "The willingness to seize the moment, to take risks and dance when the music calls." Darian set down his utensils, the silver making a soft click against the fine china. "Some risks aren't worth taking. That's exactly your problem," he said. Ava rolled her eyes dramatically. "Everything's about risk assessment with you, Dad. God forbid anyone actually lives a little. There's a difference between living and being reckless." "Reckless," Cecilia laughed sharply. Is that what you call having fun? No wonder we hardly go out anymore. When was the last time you took me dancing, Darian? When was the last time you did anything spontaneous? The table fell into uncomfortable silence. Samantha busied herself with her salad, while Uncle Julian suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Only Grayson seemed at ease, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I remember when you used to love dancing, Grayson said to Cecilia, his voice soft with nostalgia. You moved like music was in your soul. It's a crime to let talent like that go to waste. The band in the adjacent ballroom began to play, a slow melody drifting through the open doors. Grayson stood and extended his hand toward Cecilia with practiced grace. Speaking of waste, he smiled, would you do me the honor? Ava practically bounced in her seat. Oh, Mom, you have to. When was the last time you had a proper dance partner? Darian rose slowly from his chair, his voice cutting through the moment like a blade. Cecilia, if you dance with him, I'll leave you. The conversation at nearby tables stuttered to a halt. Cecilia stared at him, her eyes widening before narrowing in anger. Excuse me. Are you actually threatening me over a dance? Dad, you're being ridiculous. Ava interjected, her tone dripping with disdain. God, could you be any more insecure? It's just a dance. You're embarrassing yourself, and Mom. You heard me, Darian said, his resolve hardening as years of suppressed anger crystallized in his tone. Make your choice. Cecilia stood, her chin lifted in defiance. The red dress caught the light, reminding him of warning signs he should have heeded years ago. You don't get to control me, Darian. I'm not one of your employees you can order around. Yeah, Dad. Ava added, standing beside her mother like a mirror image of rebellion. Maybe if you weren't so controlling and paranoid, Mom wouldn't need to dance with other men to feel appreciated. The dining room had grown quiet, dozens of eyes watching the drama unfold. Darian looked between them, his wife and daughter united against him as always. The realization that had been building for years finally solidified. He was nothing more than a convenience to them, a source of financial security they tolerated but did not respect. Last chance, Cecilia, he said quietly, each word carrying the weight of 23 years of accumulated disappointment. Don't do this. Cecilia took Grayson's hand, her eyes challenging Darian's. Come on, Grayson, I'd love to dance. The room washed as they moved to the dance floor, Grayson's hand settling possessively on Cecilia's waist. The music played something slow and romantic, and they swayed together, their bodies closer than propriety demanded. Cecilia laughed at something Grayson whispered in her ear, her hand sliding up to his shoulder in a gesture that spoke of familiar intimacy. Happy now, Dad? Ava's voice dripped with contempt as she returned to her seat, making the scene over nothing. Mom's right. You really need to get over your insecurity issues. But Darian wasn't listening anymore. He watched as Grayson's hand drifted lower on Cecilia's back, while she leaned into him, their faces close enough to share each other's breath. 23 years of marriage, countless sacrifices, endless patience. Everything meant nothing in the face of this deliberate public betrayal. Without a word, he turned and walked away from the table. His footsteps were steady across the polished floor, each step carrying him further from the sounds of music and laughter. He could hear Ava's dismissive scoff behind him, and could practically see her and Cecilia exchanging triumphant looks, certain he would return with his tail between his legs, ready to be exploited once again. The country club's parking lot was dark now, the early evening air carrying a chill that matched the ice forming around his heart. He got into his car, the very car he had bought because Cecilia had insisted it was the right brand for their social circle, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he could see the warm glow from the clubhouse windows and imagine his wife and daughter still reveling in their perceived victory. They had no idea that this dance would be their last waltz with wealth and security. No idea that their comfortable world was about to crumble. No idea that the man they had dismissed as boring and predictable had finally reached his breaking point. Darian Collins drove into the gathering darkness, his mind already formulating plans. They'd wanted to dance. Fine, but this time, I will be calling the tune the morning after the reunion. The next morning, Cecilia woke to an empty house and a dozen missed calls from Ava. She grabbed her phone, her head still fuzzy from last night's wine and dancing. "Ava," she answered, stifling a yawn. "What's wrong?" "It's barely 9. "Dad's not answering his phone," came Ava's crackling response. "Like, at all. Have you heard from him?" Cecilia sat up, the silk sheets sliding off her shoulders as she glanced at the untouched side of the bed. "He's probably at the office sulking. You know how dramatic he can be." "Mom, I already called his office. Jessica says he hasn't come in, and his calendar is completely cleared for the next month." Ava's voice grew more urgent. Something cold settled in Cecilia's stomach. She swung her legs out of bed and padded across the plush carpet to Darian's closet. "He's just being difficult. He'll get over it." The words died in her throat as she pulled open the closet door. Empty hangers greeted her where Darian's suits should have been. The built-in drawers stood open, stripped of their contents. His leather briefcase, always positioned precisely by the door, was gone. "Mom," Ava's voice rose with concern. "What?" "He took his clothes. All of them. Everything." Cecilia moved through the closet, checking each drawer. His suits, casual clothes, even those hideous golf shirts he loved so much. They were all gone. "Oh my gosh," Ava whispered. "Do you think he actually meant it, about leaving?" "Don't be ridiculous," Cecilia snapped, though uncertainty crept into her tone. "Your father doesn't have the spine for something like this. He's just trying to prove a point. Should we call Uncle Miles? Maybe he knows something." "No," Cecilia said firmly, closing the closet door. "We're not giving him the satisfaction of making a scene. He'll come back when he's done throwing his little tantrum." But as the day wore on, doubt began to gnaw at her confidence. Darian's toothbrush was missing from the master bathroom. His laptop was gone from his study. Even his reading glasses, perpetually perched on his bedside table, had vanished. The doorbell rang just as Cecilia was pouring her third glass of wine. She opened it to find Ava still wearing last night's makeup and clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Have you checked the accounts?" Ava asked as she brushed past her mother into the foyer. "What?" Cecilia followed her daughter to Darian's study. "Why would I need to check the accounts?" Ava was already logging into the banking website on Darian's desktop computer. "Because Dad manages all the money, Mom. Remember last month when you couldn't even find the password to check your credit card balance? That's what accountants are for." Cecilia moved to look over Ava's shoulder as the screen loaded. "Oh no!" Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Mom, it's empty. There's only like $5,000 left." "That's impossible." Cecilia pushed Ava aside and took control of the mouse. "There should be at least $500,000 in there. Check the investment accounts." Ava pulled up another window, her face growing paler. "Those are empty too. Everything's been transferred out in the last 12 hours. He can't do this." Cecilia's voice rose in panic. "That's my money too. Call the bank. Tell them it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake, Mom," Ava said flatly as she sat back, running her hands through her disheveled hair. "Dad's name is on everything. He has full access, remember? You said you didn't want to deal with all the boring financial stuff when you got married." The phone rang, making them both jump. Cecilia grabbed it, hope flaring. "Darian? Mrs. Collins. This is American Express. We're calling about some unusual activity on your account." Yes, Cecilia interjected. "There must be some mistake. My husband. Your husband called this morning to remove you as an authorized user on all cards. As the primary card holder, it's his right to do so. I'm calling to inform you that your cards have been deactivated." Cecilia sank into Darian's leather office chair, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "He can't do this. I'm his wife," she protested. The representative continued in a measured tone before hanging up. Cecilia turned to Ava with wild eyes. "Your father has lost his mind. Call him again. Call everyone. His friends, colleagues, family. Someone must know where he is." Ava was already dialing, but each call went straight to voicemail. With each failed attempt, their composure cracked further. "What about my tuition? And my spring break trip? The money he transferred yesterday?" Ava suddenly asked, her face growing even paler. Another call interrupted them, this time from Ava's bank. The transfer had been reversed. All of it. That vindictive scoundrel. Cecilia spat, pacing the study. All this over one stupid dance. He's being ridiculous. "Mom." Ava's voice was small and tentative. "What are we going to do? The house payment is due next week and your cards aren't working." "We'll figure it out," Cecilia said firmly, though her hand shook as she lifted the wine glass to her lips. "He can't just disappear. He's probably at some hotel waiting for us to beg him to come back." But as they called every hotel in the city, then every hotel in neighboring cities, the truth began to sink in. Darian Collins, the predictable, boring, reliable Darian, had outmaneuvered them completely. Ava hesitated, picking at her manicured nails. "Maybe we should call Grayson. He's good with money." And after last night, Cecilia's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Oh yes, let's call the man your father accused me of betraying him with. That will definitely help the situation." "Well, we have to do something," Ava snapped. "The electricity bill is due in 3 days. My tuition payment is pending, and we have no access to any money. Face it, Mom, Dad finally grew a spine, and he's using it to screw us over." The doorbell rang again, making them both freeze, a sound that had become Pavlovian over the past week, hope warring with dread each time. At the door, a man in a suit stood holding a thick envelope. "Mrs. Collins, I'm Richard Donovan from Collins Technology Corporation's legal department. Your husband asked me to deliver these documents personally." He held out the envelope. "It's regarding your status as a beneficiary on various company holdings and insurance policies." With trembling fingers, Cecilia opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the documents, growing wider with each page. "He's removed me," she cried, her voice rising in incredulity. "From everything, as is his right as CEO and majority shareholder," Richard replied professionally. "The changes are already processed. I'm merely here to provide formal notification." "But I helped him build that company," Cecilia protested. "I hosted the dinner parties, entertained the clients, played the perfect corporate wife for 23 years. I'm not authorized to discuss the matter further," Richard said, stepping back. "Good day, Mrs. Collins." The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the increasingly empty house. Cecilia turned to find Ava reading over her shoulder. "Mom." Ava's voice wavered. "What are we going to do? My credit cards are maxed out, and the university is threatening to drop my classes if the tuition payment doesn't clear by Friday." "Call your grandmother," Cecilia said, moving to the bar cart and pouring a generous measure of scotch. "Maybe she'll help." Ava's laugh was hollow. "I already tried," she said bitterly. And I quote, "Your father was a good man who deserved better than watching his wife throw herself at another man in public." Then he hung up on me. So sanctimonious. Cecilia took a deep breath. "Fine. What about your trust fund, the one your father set up when you were born?" Frozen, Ava slumped onto the sofa. "Dad changed the terms last week. I can't access it until I'm 30 now, and only if I prove some sort of financial responsibility and ethical behavior." The doorbell rang again. This time, a courier arrived with another envelope containing a printed email thread. It showed correspondence between Darian and Grayson from 3 days ago, warning Grayson to stay away from Cecilia unless he wanted certain financial irregularities in his company's books to become public knowledge. He's thought of everything, Ava whispered, reading over her mother's shoulder. Every single backup plan we might have had. Your father always was good with details, Cecilia said bitterly as she reached for the scotch once more. I just never thought he'd use that against us. Then the phone rang. First Cecilia's regular hairstylist calling to confirm that her standing appointment had been canceled, then her personal shopper informing her that her store accounts had all been closed, and finally the country club notifying her that her membership had been revoked. He's systematically erasing our entire life, Cecilia realized, each call bringing fresh humiliation. Everything we built, everything we had. Maybe we should apologize, Ava suggested desperately. Tell him we're sorry about the dance, about everything. I already tried, Cecilia replied, pulling out her phone and scrolling through dozens of unanswered messages. Listen to what I sent him yesterday. Call me, please. We can talk about this. What happened at the reunion was a mistake. Come home, and we'll work it out. What did he say? Nothing. An hour later, their housekeeper, Rosa, called to say she had been given a generous severance package and a glowing recommendation for a new job. He's not just cutting us off, Ava said softly. He's dismantling our entire support system. Ava's phone buzzed with a text. Her face crumpled as she read it. Celeste just uninvited me from her Aspen trip. Apparently, Dad called her father and told him about the money I borrowed last month. The money I swore I'd pay back, but never did. He's turning everyone against us. Cecilia felt the scotch burning in her throat. All those little secrets, all those small deceits they thought would never come to light. Mom, Ava's voice was small. I'm scared. I don't know how to live without money. Cecilia looked around at their luxurious home, a home they might not be able to keep much longer. Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I, she whispered. That evening, the doorbell rang one final time. This time, a different courier arrived with a small box. Inside, they found Cecilia's wedding ring, the one she had left on her bedside table the night of the reunion because it clashed with her other jewelry. A note accompanied it. You chose your dance partner. Now you can live with that choice. Cecilia stared at the ring, remembering how young and hopeful she had been when she first placed it on her finger. She had thought him boring then too, safe, dependable. But she had never imagined he could be so calculating, so ruthless. I always told you your father was predictable, she said to Ava, who sat shell-shocked beside her. I was wrong. We never really knew him at all. 2 weeks after Darian's departure, the Collins mansion felt like a mausoleum without Rosa to maintain it. Dust gathered on the expensive furnishings, unopened mail piled up on the entry table, most of it bearing red final notice stamps, and in the kitchen, take-out containers multiplied. Neither Cecilia nor Eva had ever learned to cook, always relying on their personal chef, who, like Rosa, had been efficiently removed from their lives. Your tuition payment bounced again, Cecilia called out as Ava descended the stairs, still wearing her designer pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. The university sent another email. I know, Ava snapped, heading straight for the coffee maker. They're threatening to drop me from all my classes, as if this whole thing isn't humiliating enough. Maybe you could get a student loan or a part-time job. A job? Are you serious? Do you have any idea what that would do to my social standing? Ava retorted. Your social standing? Cecilia laughed bitterly. Honey, wake up. Your friends already dropped you the moment they realized your credit cards didn't work anymore because you had to dance with him. Ava whirled on her mother, eyes blazing. You couldn't just say no. You had to prove a point. Show everyone you could still attract someone like Grayson. Don't you dare blame this on me. Cecilia stood, her anger rising. Who was it that kept pushing us together? Go on, Mom. It's just a dance. Dad's being ridiculous. Mom, don't let him control you. I didn't think he'd actually leave. Ava's voice rose to a shriek. You always said he was spineless, that he'd never stand up to us. This is your fault. You're the one who's supposed to know how to handle him. Handle him. Cecilia grabbed a bottle of wine she had opened for breakfast. Your father spent 23 years pretending to be this docile, predictable man. Meanwhile, he was setting up contingency plans, moving money, preparing for the moment we pushed him too far. Some scoundrel he turned out to be. The doorbell rang yet again. Another unwelcome intrusion into their deteriorating world. Eva yanked it open to find her best friend Madeleine standing there, looking uncomfortable. Hey. Madeleine shifted on her feet. I came to get my Birkin bag back. The one I loaned you last month. Eva's face fell. Madeleine, come on. We've been friends since kindergarten. You know, I'll pay you back for everything once this blows over. That's what you said about the money you borrowed for those concert tickets and the emergency shopping trip to New York. Madeleine replied coolly, I'm sorry, but my parents found out about it. They're making me cut ties. Cutting you out, Ava. Eva's laugh was harsh. You're abandoning me the moment things get tough. You're the one who lied to me. You never intended to pay any of us back, did you? You just kept taking, knowing Dad would always bail you out. Get out and keep the stupid bag. I have a dozen better ones anyway. Not anymore, Madeleine muttered as she turned to leave. Good luck finding new friends to scam. Eva slammed the door so hard the crystal chandelier rattled. She turned to find Cecilia watching her with an odd expression. What? Eva demanded. How many people did you borrow money from? Cecilia asked quietly. How many lies are out there waiting to come back to us? Oh, that's rich coming from you. Eva spat. Should we talk about your lies, about how you've been flirting with Grayson for years? How you deliberately wore that red dress because you knew he'd be there? I'm your mother. You're a joke. Eva's words hit like physical blows. A middle-aged woman so desperate for attention that she would risk everything just to feel desirable again. And now look at us. No money, no friends, no future. Hope that dance was worth it. Mom. Before Cecilia could think, her hand moved, and the slap echoed through the foyer. Eva staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, eyes wide with shock. You ungrateful little brat, Cecilia whispered, trembling. I gave you everything. Everything. And this is how you repay me. You gave me nothing. Eva replied, her voice shaking. Dad gave us everything. We just took it for granted and treated him like an ATM. Well, guess what? The ATM is closed, and it's all your fault. My fault. Cecilia threw her wine glass against the wall, red liquid staining the expensive wallpaper like blood. Who was it that kept pushing us together at the reunion? Who kept making those little comments about how boring your father was, how he needed to learn a lesson? You orchestrated this whole disaster because you taught me how. Eva screamed. Every manipulation, every lie, every scheme. I learned it all from you. That's how you handle men, darling. She mimicked her mother's tone. They need to be managed, controlled. Well, fantastic job managing, Dad. Mom. Really stellar work. The doorbell rang again. This time, a process server delivered notice that their joint credit card companies were suing for unpaid balances. The amount made both women blanch. I can't do this anymore, Eva said, staring at the papers. I can't stay here and watch everything fall apart. Where do you think you're going to go? Cecilia asked bitterly. Your father froze all your accounts. Your friends have abandoned you. You have nothing, thanks to you. Ava headed for the stairs. I'm going to pack whatever's left that's worth something. Maybe if I sell enough, I can at least save my spot at university. Run away. Cecilia called after her. It's what you do best when things get difficult, just like with that boy last year. What was his name? The one whose father almost sued us. Eva froze on the stairs. Don't you dare bring that up. You promised we'd never talk about it. Why not? Your father paid him off, just like he paid off all your other mistakes. But Daddy's not here to clean up your messes anymore. Is he? Cecilia's voice trembled. I hate you. The words fell like stones in the quiet house. I hate what you've turned me into. I hate that I'm just like you. Honey, Cecilia's laugh was hollow. You're worse than me. At least I only manipulated men who could afford it. You scam your own friends. They stared at each other across the foyer. Two women cut from the same cloth, finally seeing their true reflections in each other's eyes. The bond that had once been so strong shattered like Cecilia's wine glass on the marble floor. The doorbell rang one final time. Another courier arrived with an envelope. Inside was a single photograph of Cecilia at what looked like a casual dinner with colleagues, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. The message was clear. He had moved on, started fresh, while they remained trapped in the gilded cage of their own making, destroying each other as their world crumbled around them. Ava turned away and climbed the stairs without another word. Cecilia watched her go, remembering all the times they had plotted together on those same steps, thinking they were so clever, so superior. Now they couldn't even look at each other. I end the growing darkness of this house, Cecilia murmured, pouring another glass of wine with trembling hands. Somewhere out there, Darian was rebuilding his life, freed from their manipulations and demands. Meanwhile, his wife and daughter had discovered the hardest lesson of all, that the bonds forged in deceit shattered the moment fortune turned against you. A plain white envelope arrived at what remained of the Collins household 1 month after that fateful dance. Cecilia sat at the kitchen island, her once perfect manicure chipped and grown out, as she stared at the precise handwriting on the envelope. It announced her daughter's arrival, a designer accessory that was one of the few items she hadn't yet sold. Open it with trembling fingers, Ava urged, lunging across the island. Cecilia broke the seal and inside found several pages of meticulously detailed documentation, along with a letter written in Darian's unmistakable style. Dear Cecilia and Ava, by now you've had time to appreciate the consequences of your choices. Consider this letter your final lesson in cause and effect. Skip the lecture, Ava snapped. What does he want? Cecilia continued reading, her face growing paler with each paragraph. I've attached a complete accounting of my actions since leaving. Every transfer, every closed account, every canceled membership, all perfectly legal and documented with timestamps and authorization codes. He's rubbing it in our faces. Ava growled, but fear tinged her voice. The letter continued, the house will be foreclosed next week. I have arranged for the bank to give you until Friday to remove your personal belongings. Consider it my final act of courtesy. He can't do this. Cecilia cried. Ava's voice rose to a shriek. This is our home. It's his home. Cecilia corrected bitterly. Everything was in his name. We just lived here, spending his money, mocking his caution, treating him like an ATM instead of a husband and father. Keep reading, Ava demanded, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. You've had a month to reflect on your behavior, a month to learn what life is like without someone cleaning up your messes. Cecilia paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. Ava, your trust fund remains frozen until you turn 30. However, I have arranged for the university to accept you back under 2 conditions. First, you will move into standard dormitory housing, not the luxury apartment you demanded. Second, you will work part-time in the campus library to cover your personal expenses. A job. Ava's laugh held a note of hysteria. He expects me to work like some scholarship student. These terms are non-negotiable. Consider it an opportunity to develop the work ethic and character you so desperately lack. Ava grabbed her phone, punching in numbers with shaking fingers. I'm calling Grandma. She won't let him do this to me. Your grandmother helped him set this up. Cecilia read on from the next paragraph. In fact, many family members have expressed their approval of these arrangements. They've watched for years as you manipulated and deceived everyone around you. Now they'll watch you learn to stand on your own feet. The phone slipped from Ava's fingers, clattering on the marble floor. No, This isn't happening. As for you, Cecilia, the letter continued in a whisper, the divorce papers are being delivered this afternoon. My lawyer has already contacted every high-profile attorney in the city. None of them will represent you. The prenuptial agreement you signed without reading 23 years ago is ironclad. There must be some account we don't know about, some backup plan. Ava insisted, her composure cracking. You danced with him. Cecilia read the final lines, tears staining the paper. So I danced out of your lives. Now you can dance to the tune of your own making. The music has stopped. Ladies, time to pay the piper. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. As though Darian were orchestrating events from wherever he had hidden himself, a courier stood outside with another envelope thick with legal documents. Mrs. Collins, he said, I need your signature confirming receipt of divorce papers. Cecilia signed mechanically, her world narrowing to the weight of the envelope in her hands. Behind her, Ava was still trying to reach family members, each call going straight to voicemail. No one's answering, Ava said, panic creeping into her voice. Mom, what are we going to do? Before Cecilia could respond, both their phones chimed with new email notifications. Ava opened hers first, her face crumpling as she read. The movers. Darian had hired movers. They were coming tomorrow to start packing up his things. Everything he paid for. The art, the antiques, the collectibles. He's not just divorcing me. He's erasing every trace of his presence from our lives. Cecilia read her own email, her heart sinking. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time, Madeline's mother arrived, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and disdain. I've come to discuss Ava's outstanding debts to my daughter, she announced, brushing past them into the foyer. Now that it's clear you won't be able to hide behind your father's money anymore, we need to arrange a payment plan. Payment plan. Ava's laugh held a tinge of madness. I have nothing left to pay with. Then we'll discuss other options, Madeline's mother replied coolly. Perhaps community service. The court system takes a dim view of fraud. Even among the young and privileged, the threat hung in the air like expensive perfume, the kind they could no longer afford. Cecilia watched her daughter crumple under the weight of consequences, finally understanding that charm and manipulation couldn't fix everything. I'll get my checkbook, Cecilia said quietly, though they all knew it was a meaningless gesture. Every check she wrote now would bounce, every promise of payment hollow. In that moment, the growing silence in their soon-to-be-lost home was complete. Mother and daughter faced the ruins of the life they had taken for granted, each ring of the doorbell bringing new revelations of their failures, new evidence of Darian's methodical dismantling of their world. They had danced with betrayal, and now they would pay for every misstep. In a modest two-bedroom apartment on the unfashionable side of town, a prison compared to their former mansion, Cecilia stood in what passed for a living room, surrounded by a few pieces of furniture they had managed to salvage from Cecilia's old modeling money. This can't be all that's left, Ava said, staring at the meager collection of possessions. Where's my crystal collection? My designer wardrobe? Your father's lawyers provided receipts for everything, Cecilia replied in a hollow tone. Every handbag, every pair of shoes, every crystal figurine, all purchased with his money, which means they stay with him. The sound of a truck backing up drew them to the grimy window. Below, they watched as their neighbors unloaded second-hand furniture from a pickup truck, items they had been forced to buy from a consignment shop to replace their lost luxury pieces. I can't believe we have to use someone else's old furniture, Ava muttered bitterly. Do you know who might have sat on that couch before us? Someone who actually earned it. Cecilia's voice rose sharply. The movers are charging by the hour. Help me unpack. Why bother? Ava kicked at a box marked kitchen items. This place is a dump. The bathroom doesn't even have a jet tub, and I swear I saw a roach in the hallway. Well, unless you magically find a way to pay for something better, this dump is home now, Cecilia said, tearing open a box and pulling out their few remaining dishes. At least your father arranged for you to stay in the dorms next semester. Aren't you serious? The dorms, with a roommate, like some scholarship charity case. You should be grateful. Ava snapped, her patience finally breaking. Grateful? For what? For having to work in the library. For living in a tiny dorm room. For watching all my friends post about their luxury vacations while I'm shelving books. For having a future at all. Ava's voice trembled with bitterness. Cecilia hurled a packing paper across the room. Do you understand what your father has done? He's left me with nothing. No alimony, no property, no investments. I have to start over at 45. And it's all your fault. Ava grabbed her designer handbag, one of the few she had managed to hide from the lawyers. If you hadn't danced with Grayson. If I hadn't danced, she whispered. Cecilia whirled on her daughter. You pushed me toward him. You kept making those little comments, orchestrating every interaction. You played us both, Ava, just like you played everyone else in your life. I learned from the best, didn't I? Ava's voice dripped venom. You taught me how to manipulate men, how to value money over integrity, to think I was better than everyone else. A knock at the door interrupted their argument. Through the peephole, they saw Madeline standing in the hallway, holding a stack of papers. What do you want? Ava demanded, yanking the door open. Come to gloat, Madeline replied, her designer outfit a stark contrast to their shabby surroundings. My mother sent me with the repayment agreement. Madeline, if you don't sign it today, we're pressing charges, Madeline continued coldly. For borrowed money. Don't be ridiculous. Cecilia stepped forward. Not just borrowed money. Fraud. Identity theft. Ava, you used my credit card information without permission at least 6 times. We have the receipts. Madeline's face went pale. Madeline, please. Ava pleaded. We've been friends forever. Friends don't steal from each other. Sign the agreement. Madeline insisted. You'll work at my mother's company over the summer filing and cleaning. Minimum wage. That's how you repay your debts. I can't. Ava staggered. I've never worked a day in my life. Yeah, we know. That's about to change, Madeline said coolly. After Madeline left, Cecilia found Ava sitting on their second-hand couch, staring at the repayment agreement. Did you really steal from her? Cecilia asked quietly. What difference does it make? Ava's voice was empty. You stole from Dad for years, took his money while flirting with other men, treating him like a bank account instead of a husband. At least I was honest about being a thief. Is that what you think I did? Cecilia sank onto the couch beside her daughter. You think I just married him for money, didn't you? Ava turned to face her mother. All those stories about how boring he was, how he didn't understand you, how you settled for security instead of passion. Face it, Mom, you never loved them. You just loved his wallet. The truth hung between them like poison gas, contaminating what little warmth remained in their relationship. I have to pack for the dorm, Ava said finally, standing. Apparently, I'm only allowed 2 suitcases of clothes. Dad's rules. Cecilia reached for her daughter's hand, but Ava pulled away. Don't. Her voice cracked. Just don't. We did this to ourselves, and you know it. All those times we laughed at him, mocked him, treated him like he was nothing. We never thought he'd fight back. That's the real joke. We were so convinced of our own superiority that we never saw him outmaneuvering us at every turn. Through the thin walls of their new apartment, they could hear their neighbors arguing about money, bills, and the everyday struggles of normal life. A preview of their new reality. No more luxury shops, no more spa days, no more looking down on the common people they had once dismissed as beneath them. I'm going to bed, Ava announced, heading for her tiny bedroom. I have to be up early tomorrow to fill out job applications. Apparently, that's what common people do. Cecilia watched her daughters retreat, remembering all the times they had sat together in their mansion, plotting and scheming, thinking they were so clever. Now they could barely stand to look at each other. a painful reminder of how far they had fallen. Later, Cecilia pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos of happier times. She paused on one from years ago, her teaching Iva to ride a bike, his face patient and kind despite their constant mockery of his conventional ways. "We never deserved him," she whispered to the empty room. "And now, we never will again." 6 months after the dance that changed everything, Darian Collins sat in his new office, reviewing quarterly reports. The wall-to-ceiling windows offered a view of a different city skyline, one untainted by memories of betrayal. His phone buzzed with a message from his realtor. "The mansion sale closed this morning. New owners take possession next week." Darian allowed himself a small smile. The house had sold for well above asking price, another vindication of his financial instincts. He had donated Cecilia's designer furniture to various charities, converted Ava's trust fund into scholarships for underprivileged students, and systematically dismantled every trace of his old life. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Collins, your dinner reservation is confirmed for 7, and the team's ready for the presentation whenever you are." "Thanks, Jennifer," he replied with a smile at his new assistant, hired for her competence rather than her connections in society circles. "How's your son doing with those college applications?" Jennifer beamed. "Much better, thanks to that scholarship program you recommended. He's actually excited about studying business now." The interaction was simple, professional, and devoid of manipulation or hidden agendas, a cleansing contrast to decades of navigating Cecilia's social machinations and Ava's constant schemes. Then his intercom buzzed again. "Sir, there's a call from the university board." "Put it through, please." Darian picked up the phone and listened as a board member updated him on Ava's situation. "She's struggling with the work-study program." The man reported that she showed up late twice this week and complained about the manual labor. "Should we make an exception?" "Absolutely not," Darian said firmly. "She needs to learn that actions have consequences. If she can't handle the responsibilities, she can leave the program entirely." After hanging up, Darian opened his laptop to check the surveillance report he had commissioned. The photo showed his former life in stark detail. Cecilia leaving a discount department store wearing last season's fashion, Ava carrying textbooks to her job at the library, and their used car parked outside a shabby apartment building. Then his phone rang, a familiar number he had not seen in months. On the other end was Cecilia's voice, smaller than he remembered. "Please, can we talk? We have nothing to discuss." "I'm sorry," he replied calmly. "The divorce is final. The assets are divided, and the house has been sold." "Theirs." She paused, and he could hear the strain in her voice. "Ava's in trouble. She's talking about dropping out, moving to Miami with some guys she met online. I can't control her anymore." "That sounds like a personal problem," Darian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "One you created by teaching her that manipulation and deceit were acceptable behaviors. She's your daughter." Cecilia's voice cracked. "Don't you care what happens to her?" "I cared for 18 years, he replied. "I tried to teach her values, responsibility, basic human decency, but you undermined every lesson, turning her into a mirror image of yourself. Now you can both live with the results." "We're drowning here," Cecilia whispered. "Everything's falling apart. I never knew. I never realized how much work it took to maintain your lifestyle." Darian finished, his tone cold. "How much I sacrificed to give you everything you wanted. No, you never did realize. You were too busy dancing with other men and mocking my dedication." He could hear her crying now, a sound that brought no emotion to his heart. "The department store job barely covers rent," she sobbed. "My modeling contacts won't return my calls. I don't know how to live like this." "You should have thought of that before you chose your dance partner," he said, his words as cold as ice. "Final goodbye, Cecilia. Don't call again." He hung up, turning back to his window overlooking the city humming with activity, people working, building, creating value instead of just consuming it. His new life felt clean, uncluttered by the constant drama and manipulation that had characterized his marriage. Shortly thereafter, his intercom buzzed one final time. "Sir, your dinner guests have arrived early. Should I send them up? I'll meet them in the lobby," he replied, gathering his jacket. The elevator ride down gave him time to reflect on the changes these 6 months had brought. His company was thriving, freed from the social obligations Cecilia had insisted were necessary. His new friends were genuine, drawn to his character rather than his wallet. Even his health had improved, freed from the constant stress of managing his wife's and daughter's expectations. The lobby doors opened to reveal his dinner companions, business associates who respected his acumen, valued his insights, and never once suggested he needed to be more spontaneous or exciting. They greeted him with genuine warmth, their conversation focusing on deals and opportunities rather than society gossip and manipulation. "Shall we?" He gestured toward the door, where his driver waited with a modest car, the exact opposite of what Cecilia had insisted they needed to maintain appearances. As they drove through the city, Darian's phone buzzed with one final message, a photo from the university security office showing Ava arguing with her supervisor at the library, her face twisted in the same entitled expression she had learned from her mother. Darian deleted the message without responding. Their choices had led them here. Their actions had destroyed the family he had worked so hard to build. Now they could experience life without his protection, his provision, his endless patience with their schemes. Some would call it revenge, but Darian saw it differently. He had simply stepped away, removed his support from those who had never appreciated it, and allowed natural consequences to unfold. The fact that those consequences had devastated their comfortable world wasn't revenge. It was justice. At a quiet, elegant restaurant, Darian sat with his new associates, discussing plans and possibilities. He felt the last weights of his old life falling away. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment with peeling wallpaper, his ex-wife and daughter were learning harsh lessons about loyalty, respect, and the true cost of betrayal. He raised his glass, toasting to new beginnings and clean breaks. The dance was over. The music had stopped, and Darian Collins had finally learned to let go of those who had never valued him to begin with.